having everybody pouring in. Good evening and welcome, welcome. It's lovely to see lots of you appearing in the participants box just there. We've just been having a couple of little technical moments, as you do. Um, so great to see you all pouring in. When the numbers have stabilised, then we'll just have a bit of a chat. So, welcome. So, if you are not familiar with Zoom, if you give your mouse a little wiggle at the bottom, you should see one box for chat and one for Q&A. So, the chat one is for chatting to each other. When you log into the chat, please can you change it from hosts and panelists to everyone? If you want everyone to see your comments. We've got people logging on. Tell us where you're joining from. So we've got Peterborough, Gosport, Bolton, Peckham. Oh, it's all happening from York, Bristol, hi in Bristol, um, Staveley, Peterborough. So we've got people joining from all over. If you would like to chat to anyone during the session, then please do pop into the chat and you can either direct those. Cyprus, jealous, very jealous. You can either direct your comments to everybody or you can choose who you would like to send those comments to. So just be aware if you want everyone to see them to change it to everyone in the chat. Please can you pop your questions in the Q&A rather than in the chat? I will also be fielding things as well. The recording is in progress now, and the chat will not be visible in that recording. So we are really excited because the Cycle Touring Festival has been going since 2015, and we've had a mix of in-person and then very quickly Tim and Laura shot like dynamite onto online festivals once that was no longer an option with COVID. So it's really exciting that we can all be nice and warm in our homes and still be listening to amazing talks. The talks and everybody who's working to make this happen, everybody's volunteer, nobody's paid, there's no paid employees. The speakers are giving up their time for free. Thank you so much, Catherine, for giving up your time and making a wonderful talk. And if you would like to make a donation, that would be very welcome. It costs around £1,000 a year to keep the website up and running and run the mailing list. We've got a suggested donation of £5 a talk or £20 for a household for all of the talks. So if you are in a position where you're able to donate anything, that would be amazing. If not, then we don't want money to be a barrier and we're just very excited to be able to welcome you along. So I'll just pop the donation link in the chat in case anyone would like to use that. So that's just popped up now. Apart from that, I think that's all my housekeeping. If anybody is experiencing any difficult, please do let us know. But otherwise, I'm going to turn off my face and we can listen to Catherine. And at the end, I'll be fielding, I'm sure, many questions to her. So, Catherine, thank you again so much and well done for getting your slides sorted out. Catherine had all her notes beautifully ready and the computer wasn't really enjoying that. So, she's going to wing it without her notes and it's still going to be fantastic. I've seen Catherine speak a few times before and she's always super inspiring. And at the end, I have run up to her before and said, I want to come cycling with you with a hammock. Except I'd be far too embarrassed because I'd be really slow. Anyway, thanks very much. And Catherine, over to you.
Thank you very much, Libby, and thank you so much for hosting tonight. Next CTF, you're going to ride up with me, hammock or not. And thank you so much, Laura, for inviting me to come and speak at the festival online this year. I'm mainly going to be talking about my trip from Aberdeen down to South Somerset last summer, which I did pretty much directly after the Cycle Touring Festival last May. I was very kindly offered a lift up to Aberdeen with Tim, who was heading up there because he was cycling, he was getting a ferry from Aberdeen to the Shetland Islands. He was planning to do a cycle tour in the Shetland Islands, which I think he's talking about tomorrow. So do come along and check that talk out because I know he had a really amazing trip. So I'm going to be talking about my trip through the UK, also kind of hammocking in general. the pros and cons, why I enjoy it, the things that you maybe might want to consider if you think about doing a hammocking trip, and also some of the things that cycling with a hammock has made me reflect upon a little bit. Okay, let's get started. So, why do I like hammocks, first of all, I guess? So I spent a few years living in the Arabian Gulf, where temperatures go through the roof in the summer and they're also pretty hot all year round. And I found that lying in a hammock, spending time in a hammock was a really cool place to be. You've got airflow underneath you, so it's much more comfortable than sitting in a chair or on a sofa, and it's much more comfortable sleeping in a hammock, I found, than on a mattress. So after a while, I actually strung up my hammock inside my apartment and regularly slept in it. And then also another part to this is that I've struggled for many years with insomnia. And while I was out there in the Gulf, I had the hammock hanging up indoors in my bedroom. I found that often when I couldn't sleep, I'd go into the hammock and I'd fall asleep quite quickly. So I really began to associate a hammock with a sound, comfortable night's sleep. And I really do believe that I sleep much better in a hammock than I do on a bed, get a much sounder sleep. So obviously this is a very comfortable hammock, but it's not a camping hammock. This is kind of more what we're talking about when we talk about camping with a hammock. So there's various components that you're probably going to want to have. I'm sorry, this is a slightly grainy picture. The hammock itself, a tarpaulin, unless you are absolutely sure that you're not going to experience rain. Some tree huggers or webbing straps. They are straps that go around the tree that are a little bit thicker, quite a bit thicker than the hammock strings to protect the tree bark. And then another thing that many hammocks come with now is what we call snake skins, which is the crinkly bit you can see in the top left-hand corner of the picture. That's just something to sort of like a sleeve for the hammock, to keep it clean if you want to close it up while it's still hanging. And then another thing that is really important to consider, like I mentioned, it's a lot cooler in a hammock, so you're going to need some extra insulation if you are in the UK or many parts of Northern Europe. And that can either be an underquilt. Many people, it's very common in North America when people use hammocks, they would have an underquilt, which is just basically a quilt, another layer that attaches underneath the hammock. Or you can use a thermarest, some kind of inflatable mattress inside the hammock. That's the option that I go for, mainly because I already have one and it saves having to buy something else, but also because if you are unable to find a good place to hang the hammock and you do have to sleep on the ground, you've got a mattress to sleep on. So yeah, this photo shows the snake skins. The hammock is there inside the snake skins. And so you can keep it sort of packed away like that. You can sit on it as it is there. Snake skins are definitely not essential, but I do like using them. So this is a hammock, this is the first hammock I bought. I have two. This one is a hammock made by a company called Hennessy Hammocks. They are, in my opinion, a really excellent company, and their website is full of really useful hammocking information. This hammock in particular is good because it has like an integral, what's the word, ridge line. So that keeps the mosquito netting off your face. And it's got some really nice pockets inside. And then it's got some pullouts either side, which put the hammock in an asymmetric position to help you sleep on the diagonal. That's a really key thing about being comfortable in a hammock, is that you need to be sleeping on the diagonal. If you sleep directly, sort of end to end, you will be bent up like a banana and you'll wake up with backache. But sleeping on the diagonal, you can get a very flat lay, and you can be as flat as you would be in a bed. So that's the Hennessy hammock. And then there's this hammock, which is made by a company called Hammock Bliss. This is the hammock I took with me on my trip through the UK, and it's also the hammock I used a few years ago. I cycled to Sweden, and I took this hammock on this trip as well. I prefer this one, I think, because it's just a bit roomier. And also it has this sleeve inside, which you can put a mattress in, which is how for this hammock you get that asymmetric diagonal lay. And of course, that just means that the thermarest stays in position more and it's just way more comfortable. So I cycled back from Aberdeen by a kind of wiggly route, not the most direct route. Um, my route I basically chose for two reasons. One, because I'd never been to Scotland before, and I really wanted to see Glasgow, to see Edinburgh, and to explore the Cairngorms National Park, which I'd heard a lot about. They're doing some amazing reforestation work, conservation work, so I wanted to spend a bit of time in the Cairngorms. And then the other part of my trip was visiting friends and family members that live in the north of England, and I hadn't seen for a very long time. So those two parts kind of dictated where I went, but to a certain extent, I was making up my route as I went. I didn't really have any particular plan. So yeah, there was a loop around the Cairngorms, then to Edinburgh, sorry, Glasgow, then across to Edinburgh, down the Northumberland coast where I had a relative that I wanted to visit, and then across the coast to coast path towards the Lake District where I saw a friend there, sort of in the Yorkshire Dales area. And then heading down across the Forest of Bowland, down towards Liverpool to see another friend in North Wales, another friend in Shropshire. And then I had something in Worcester that I had to be there for on a particular date. So that did dictate a bit of the timing of my trip. And then home to Somerset via a little detour around the New Forest. That was because the weather had really picked up at that point, and I just didn't want to miss all the sunny days. I wanted to make the most of that as much as I could. So my bike on the right, I always tell myself I carry more than I want to, but I do try and go as light as possible. The hammock is in the small grey bag. It's actually an old Thermarest bag underneath the handlebars. Two panniers, one for mainly camping things, the other one for sort of food and my stove. I think most of my clothes are in that blue dry bag. And then I'll just mention, because it came up so many times on my trip, the small black bag that you can see on the top tube. That's a bag that I picked up from Decathlon. So many times on the trip, people asked me if it was a battery, which kind of surprised me, but yeah, it's not. It's just a really great little bag to put snacks and food in. So this was my first night after leaving Aberdeen. It's yeah, near Banchory, just a little bit further west from Aberdeen. I think the thing I like the most about sleeping in hammocks is when you're obviously suspended from trees. It's that real close connection with the trees, being cradled by trees, surrounded by trees. If you're lucky enough to have a clear, dry night when you don't need to use the tarpaulin, then being able to look up at the trees kind of gently swaying in the breeze, to hear the owls, to feel sort of to sense mammals, small mammals wandering around the woodland floor. It just gives, for me, I feel a much closer connection with my surroundings than I do in a tent. I love camping in tents as well, but I feel, yeah, I just find it a much more enjoyable experience in a hammock. The picture on the left, I guess you can hopefully see that it is a fairly flat lay. The silver part that you can see, that is the sleeve that is inside the hammock where I put the thermarest. So yeah, this was a lovely spot. A lot of the forest in Scotland, of course, is coniferous, and a lot of it is native Scots pine, but then there's also a lot of plantation. So a lot of it is Sitka spruce, which obviously is not as diverse and not native. And I experienced in quite a few different types of woodland while I was there. This was a really lovely spot to camp. So I came along towards Ballater and past Balmoral towards Braemar and then back again. So yeah, this was a really lovely spot to sleep. I believe I actually spent 2 nights here. I went towards Braemar and then I was looking for another spot to camp and then I thought, oh, I'll just return to the same place I was last night because it was very nice. The So I'm just trying to remember the things without my notes that I wanted to say here. The ideal spacing between trees, I think depends on the hammock that you have. For my hammock, it's around about 4 meters. So very often what I do is I'll try and pace between the trees just to work out if I've got the right kind of distance. When I get into a woodland, I'll usually just leave my bike against a tree somewhere and then walk around and try and find, some trees that are the right space apart, the right distance apart, obviously without too much undergrowth that's tall or thorny undergrowth. And quite often it happens that I wander quite a long distance from my bike. So I have to really concentrate and keep orientating myself so that I don't lose my bike. And then when I found, a place that I think would be ideal for sleeping, I'll often hang my helmet up on a tree branch, and then I can find that tree again when I've um, grabbed my bike and when I come back. So yeah, this is a lovely view to wake up to first thing in the morning. You don't need to unzip anything. You can just open your eyes and there's your bike still there. So yeah, after Ballater, I headed on the road up towards Tomintoul. It's just a long, long uphill. I think the highest point is the Lecht Ski Centre, which is 2,090 meters. I had lovely weather this day, so it was a really hard, long climb, but it was a very, very enjoyable cycle. So I enjoyed that day very much. Glenlivet Estate is somewhere I camped. It's just north of Tomintoul, I think. Um, yeah, and I think the wonderful thing about Scotland and about camping in Scotland is that wild camping is legal and it's welcomed actually in many places. You see signs everywhere through the Cairngorms and other parts of Scotland, sort of encouraging you that if you're going to wild camp, then have you done X, Y, Z? And I think, this is just really amazing. It's a lovely breath of fresh air coming from England, where wild camping is not permitted legally. So, of course, the most important things is to leave no trace, to make sure you take everything with you. Really important with Scotland, with the forest there, is that you don't light fires, and of course you kind of hide yourself as much as you can. You don't camp right next to a road or a path. I would do this anyway for my own safety reasons, as well as just trying to be discreet. This was not such a good day, not such a good moment, I should say. So I was cycling from Grandtown on Spey along the road, and I started seeing lots and lots of dead bees on the road in front of me, and I was thinking, what's going on here? Why are there so many dead bees on the road? It was so many, really sad. And I got off my bike and I started walking and counting them, and I got to 40 in just a couple of minutes. And so I hopped back on the bike and started cycling along, and I came across this grass cutting machine, or the murder machine, as I termed it. And he'd been going along for kilometers, probably the whole afternoon. I dread to think how many bees had been killed in that afternoon. It was mid-May. The grass wasn't particularly long. So I did spend the rest of the afternoon writing an email to the council and tagging them in lots of pictures on Twitter. In a climate and biodiversity crisis, this seemed an insane thing to be doing. So it did upset and infuriate me. Um, Moving on from there, so coming south from Grantown-on-Spey, I headed towards um oh, I've forgotten. I headed towards Lake Garton, that's it, Lake Garton. And yeah, I camped right on the side of Loch Garton, which was a really, really beautiful spot. There's an RSPB centre, and I was actually very close to the RSPB centre. I was a little bit unsure whether it was okay to camp there, so I was kind of hesitating. There were no signs saying you couldn't camp there. So I lingered around and I thought, I'll put the hammock up once it's almost dark. But as I was waiting there, two RSPB rangers walked past and they asked me if I was planning to camp. And I said yes, if that was okay. And they said, of course, you're very welcome. So that was really nice. I had a long chat with them. They said they patrol the lake every evening, looking for wild campers and just checking that everybody is kind of, going about things in the right way, not causing a disturbance. They do get quite a few large groups that go there with vehicles and making a bit of noise. But they did give me some very useful advice. They said, don't hang around, put your hammock up now because the mozzies are coming soon. And I hadn't experienced any issues with mosquitoes or with midges since I left Aberdeen. So I was a little bit confused by this, but goodness me, they were right. So I put the hammock up, got inside, and just moments after I took this photo, the mosquitoes descended, and I would have been eaten alive if I'd got out. I did actually have to get out later on to go to the toilet, so yeah, that was a bit annoying. But luckily, I had a few bits of food that I could eat in the hammock because the mosquitoes were really, really horrendous that night. Only this night, I didn't have any issues anywhere else. So I had been in touch with a couple of warm showers hosts in advance of my trip. And this one person I had been in touch with said, you're more than welcome to come and stay at my place. But since you've got a hammock and you enjoy camping, if you like, I own a small patch of woodland and it will be a really lovely place to camp if the weather's nice. I should just mention for anybody who doesn't know what Warm Showers is, it's kind of a reciprocal hosting website for cyclists. So connecting people who are cycling on tour with people who are at home and have space to host. So this person sent me a pin on the map, and this is where I ended up. I felt so blessed to be kind of following the bluebells. It was really lovely. So I thought, well, this is fantastic. Went through the gate. There was a mown path across this sort of area of oak glade, and then up a steep bank to a point where you're looking over the River Tay. And I camped here, which is in that patch of woodland. I honestly felt like the luckiest person alive. Hanging from two oak trees, surrounded by bluebells and a rushing river. It was just absolutely gorgeous. And the next morning, I went and into the nearby village where the host was living and had brunch and a nice warm shower at their place. So yeah, it was a really lovely experience. This one, not quite so much. This was a little bit further on, so I followed the shores of Loch Tay to a place called Killin. And just after Killin, I was looking for somewhere to camp. Very often, when I'm with the hammock, I'll just look on Google Satellite for some green patches where I think, well, that must be woodland. But it's often quite difficult just from that to know what you're going to expect. The Ordnance Survey maps do give a little bit more detail about the kind of woodland, but still it's hard to know. This spot, yeah, as you can see, it's a plantation that has recently been felled. The weather was horrific this night. I ended up staying until about 1 o'clock the next day because the weather was just so bad. Um, yeah, it was okay, but a less than ideal spot compared to the night before. The weather kind of deteriorated from that point, actually, as I was heading down the Loch Lomond area towards Glasgow. So this is the slightly demented face of somebody who's been on a canal path for some time. So I managed to get down to Glasgow, and I stayed with a warm showers host in Glasgow. And then the weather didn't look as though it was going to improve. So I did sort of need to make progress. So I thought I'll just head across to Edinburgh on the canal path. Canal path between Glasgow and Edinburgh is around 80 or 90 kilometers, I think. And yeah, you follow the Forth and Clyde Canal, and then at Falkirk, it connects with the Union Canal. And yeah, it's a lovely route, but it was torrentially raining the whole way. So I got to Falkirk and I just, yeah, whatever, carried on, unfortunately. I stopped that night in Linlithgow, again with another warm showers host where I was able to dry off. And then the next day headed into Edinburgh. I think, there's a difference between the west and the east of the country. Edinburgh was much, much drier and sunnier, so I was very lucky. I stayed in Edinburgh for most of the day, but obviously there the accommodation is very expensive and I couldn't find a warm showers host. So I headed out Oh, sorry, I've gone ahead of myself here. So this is the second part of the canal before Edinburgh. This was a really lovely section of the canal, actually. Some really nice parts of the path, and then crossing some aqueducts. Yeah, it's really lovely to be traffic free that whole way. Then into Edinburgh, and then just after Edinburgh, this was my only paid accommodation of the trip. I hadn't been planning to stay there. I was planning to look for somewhere to hang the hammock, but I saw this place and I thought, oh, I kind of fancy that. So that was really nice. A great campsite with super facilities, and just enough room for me and the bike. So I headed down the coast towards the border with England. The weather definitely picked up, and I had a couple of really nice days riding. This was my first camp inside England. Again, here I'd been heading towards an area on the map where I thought there was quite a large forest, and I got there and it was all gated, huge fences, keep out signs. So that was kind of disappointing. This is this is an unusual spot that I camped in here. It was just an area of woods. There was a footpath on both sides. The area of trees was probably no more than sort of 10, 15 meters square, but it was just enough to tuck myself in out of sight. Um, and yeah, I left early in the morning, so I don't think anybody ever knew I was there, which is great. Blue skies coming down the Northumberland coast. I visited a friend in Morpeth in Northumberland, and then another friend in Newcastle. And then coming across the coast to coast, Graham, who many of you probably know from the cycle touring festival, he's the tarpaulin expert. He agreed to join me for a couple of days cycling across the coast to coast paths, the coast to coast sort of Sustrans route. So that was really nice to have some company for a couple of days. We followed the coast to coast east to west, which is not the usual way of doing it. So you've got, less favorable hills and more of a prevailing wind. But that's where I was, so that was the way we had to go. Now, while I was with Graham, I think it's an appropriate time to talk about my tarp. We spent 2 nights in campsites, which is not always the easiest thing to do when you have a hammock rather than a tent. But there are an increasing number of campsites nowadays which are set up for hammocking or for more wild camping style. So the one on the left was a really lovely campsite in the North Pennines. The one on the right was in the Lake District. Yeah, I just want to talk about my tarp for a moment. So I had with me a DD Hammocks tarp, which was a square 3x3 tarp. And I'll be honest, I don't like this tarp, and I've now since sold it. It's DD Hammocks are an excellent company, and this is a very, very popular tarp. But I just found for me it's too big. You can see how much room there is in the picture on the left. I mean, you could fit 20 people under there and your bike. Which is great, but obviously it's more to carry. I found that when it was a little bit windy, it was quite hard to manage to hang it up. And also, I think for me, the thing I enjoy the most about hammock camping, this detracted a little bit. You feel a little bit more like you're in a tent, a little bit more cut off. You've got less view. So the next slide actually shows my other tarp, which is the one I took on my previous trip to Sweden, which is far more minimalist. So I'm going to go back to using that one from now on. But the advantage of this extra large tarp is that if you've got the skills and a bit of experience and practice, you can make a really good shelter on the ground. It's big enough for that. So that's a shelter that Graham made at this campsite, which it's huge, and it actually rained a lot that night, and I stayed completely dry. So yeah, that extra large tarp is a really good thing to have if you do think you're going to struggle to find trees to hang from and you do need to sleep on the ground. So yeah, this is heading towards Penrith in the Lake District, and from there I sort of did a bit of a backtrack into the Yorkshire Dales because I wanted to see my friend Ellie, who I used to live near probably like 15, 20 years ago. Ellie came with me on my very first cycle trip down through France. So it was really lovely to catch up with her again. We'd not seen each other for a very long time. Postman Pat country, this was really, really lovely. This is a curlew, not my photo. But I popped it in here just because for me, this area of the North Pennines and the Yorkshire Dales was so beautiful because of this bird. It was a constant companion, hearing the kind of the bubbling cry across the grassland. I enjoyed it so much. Curlews are endangered. They're on the red list of the conservation status. And yeah, but it was such a wonderful thing to hear them from Ellie's house and from many other places while I was cycling in those areas. So this is going across the Forest of Bowland, which is not a forest at all, of course. From there, I went to Liverpool, then nipped into Wales, and then back um, to Shropshire to see John, who got me cycling in the first place many, many years ago. So that was really lovely to catch up. I mentioned earlier I had to be in Worcester. This is because I had to attend court for a trial that I was involved in to do with some non-violent direct action connected with the climate. It might seem strange that I'm mentioning this, but it was a big part of my trip because I had to be there on this certain day. And also, I think I just want to mention it because I feel like it's important that we normalize this kind of thing. We are living in quite scary, uncertain times at the moment, and I feel like in the future, many more of us are going to need to and want to be involved in nonviolent direct action for many different causes. And so, yeah, I think it's important to normalize that. I wasn't expecting that they were going to serve us evidence on this day, and I don't know why they couldn't have put it on a USB stick. But I was served 4 ring binders of evidence that thankfully a good friend of mine was able to take for me because I definitely couldn't carry it on the bicycle. So after Worcester, where I was very kindly hosted by a couple of people from the Cycle Touring Festival, um, I wasn't really sure where I was going to go from there. I had no more friends to visit, and so it was kind of open. And I remember sitting at the breakfast table with my Warm Showers host, Kirsty from the Cycle Touring Festival, and saying, where shall I go? Where are there some good forests? Where's some good woodland near here? She recommended I headed to Buckholt Wood, which is kind of quite near Cooper's Hill, where they roll the cheese down. This was a superb spot to sleep in. It was a lovely beech forest, huge beech trees. I had a very lovely night here. Again, you can see the A-frame hammock that I've got hanging. It's just huge. Um, and I think one problem with hanging in that direction is that you don't get so much length. The hammock, the tarpaulin is too big to put in the diamond shape, but hanging it in that shape, you don't get the length that you do with the other hammock, sorry, with the other tarpaulin. So I did get a little bit wet that night, which has never ever happened with the other hammock tarpaulin. So the next night I moved on towards Savernake Forest, somewhere I'd never heard of before. It was again a really lovely spot to sleep. A private forest, but I arrived very late. I left the next morning. I was well out of view, and of course, I left no trace. So, yeah, it was really nice to be there. And then I headed down towards the New Forest. I spent 2 nights in the New Forest. I think this was the second night. Again, really lovely little spot to sleep. Now, I don't know if this is going to work. Yep, there we go. So this is just a short video showing how quick and easy it is to pack up the hammock. So first the sleeping bag and the mat, and then taking down the netting, and then popping it into the snake skins, rolling it up into its bag, and then the tree straps. Ah, there we go. So in total, over the 5 weeks, I spent 17 nights camping. 16 of those were in the hammock and one on the ground in that campsite that I showed. Of the 17, so 15 were wild camps, and 2 were in campsites. And then I spent lots of nights with amazing people in houses as well, 6 being warm showers hosts and 10 being friends or family members. So I visited 7 friends along the trip, which was definitely a major part of what I had been wanting to do, and 1 night in paid accommodation, that little pod that I showed. Something that I haven't done as much of as I would like to is hanging my hammock from a single tree. This is actually not on that particular trip, but it's a large willow tree in my village. We don't have so much woodland in the UK, but we do have a lot of large, beautiful trees. So this is something I would like to do more of in the future, learning how to be a little bit more flexible and adaptable with the hammock and hang from single trees. So a few things to consider with the hammock. Really important in terms of safety is the tree you're choosing, the 2 trees you're choosing, are they healthy, strong, mature? Check above for anything loose that could fall. What's the weather forecast? You just want to be a bit careful if high winds are forecast. I tend to hang my hammock no higher than I am willing to fall. So it's quite nice as well to have it sort of chair height so you can do things on the ground. And of course, get into the hammock slowly. And then in terms of comfort, lying on the diagonal is definitely what you want to do. If you find that hyperextension of your knees cause discomfort, then put something underneath your knees. Just play around with a few different things. But I think most people with a bit of practice can find themselves very comfortable in a hammock. Pros and cons, I think I've probably mentioned most of these, so I'm not going to go through them all now. But I think for me, the pros, which are on the left-hand side, are maybe the most important ones are the ones near the bottom. So you're off the ground. It's often drier and cleaner in wet weather. Your stuff doesn't get quite as muddy as it might if you're in a tent. You can be more hidden. And of course, there's that feeling of being closer to nature, having a more intimate connection with your surroundings that for me, I definitely experience more when I'm camping in a hammock. Some of the other issues, you're, of course, more restricted where you can camp. You do need a tree. 2, preferably. It's not as easy to stay at official campsites. However, as I mentioned, there are more and more popping up. There's an amazing campsite in Bristol, which is, built for hammocks. So there are more and more that are suitable for hammocking now. And of course, it's colder, so you definitely need to take that into consideration. And again, if you are traveling with somebody else, you might want to consider, well, do we want to take 2 hammocks rather than 1 tent? 2 hammocks is probably going to be heavier than 1 lightweight tent. So yeah, there are many things to consider. And of course, it depends on the kind of hammock or the kind of tents that you choose. Yeah, I think I have touched on all of that. So yeah, I mentioned that the connection with trees, with the environment is the most important factor for me. And this got me thinking a lot about the state of nature in our country. It's quite hard in the UK, I found. It's possible, but it takes a little bit more planning to find areas to hang the hammock. And so this really got me thinking about the difference in tree cover between our country and other countries. My first trip with the hammock was to Sweden, which of course has a much, much higher percentage of woodland. So on the right, you can see quite surprising statistics. Countries like Finland and Sweden have 60, 70% of their land area covered by trees. France, Germany, Italy, Spain is around about a third. The UK is just 13% and England only 10%. So, we really are lacking in the tree cover that we have. The UK is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. And I think, this is a real issue that we need to be working on and addressing as, we're getting deeper into the climate and biodiversity crisis. And yeah, as a hammocker, we need more trees, but we need them to draw down carbon from the atmosphere. We need them for our life support systems to function and to be healthy. And And moving on from that, so why do we not have that many trees in the UK? What is all this land being used for? This graphic, I really like. It divides the UK's land up based on how it's used, not geographically, but in terms of the amount of land. So around 70% of the UK land is used for agriculture, and the vast majority of that is used for animal farming. So for producing feed for animals and for pasture. You can see a huge amount of the country is actually taken up by beef and lamb pasture, also for dairy as well. So our diets really do have a big impact on the landscape and what the landscape looks like. Now, finishing up, I just thought if anybody here is really interested in trying out a hammock, it might be useful to know a couple of companies that you can look at, and a few really useful blogs and websites where you can find out more. So, yeah, I definitely recommend Hennessy Hammocks. DD Hammocks are a Scottish company, great. I'm not a big fan of their 3x3 tarp, but they do make some really good quality stuff. And the hammock that I use is made by Hammock Bliss. And this was my last night, which was in Dorset on a hilltop looking out towards Shaftesbury. And yeah, it was a great place to end the tour just before I rolled back into Somerset the next day. So if I stop sharing and hand back to you, Libby.
Yay! Oh, thank you so much, Catherine. As always, your talks are absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure anyone who already follows you on socials will, join me in just being very grateful that you're not only into bikes for bikes purposes and bike's sake, but also that you're really authentic and you really kind of walk the walk rather than just kind of chatting about sustainability. And for any of you, I mean, are you happy to share your socials? Are you happy for people to get in touch with you and follow
Well,
you?
of course, yeah, yeah.
So
I have
please
to
share
remember
your
them now.
socials.
I'm on Instagram. I can't remember. I'll pop it in the chat in a second.
Okay. Well, anyway, it's Catherine is an absolute pleasure to follow on Instagram because she kind of filters out amazing important posts in her stories that it is really important for all of us to understand about the climate and biodiversity crisis. And Catherine is a great person to follow if you want to kind of see important snippets of what's going on, and also to feel empowered about how we can all make a difference. And she's also fantastic because she's kind of constantly going on these amazing trips and sharing tips and tricks for how to kind of travel in a more environmental way, bikes and trains and not flying. So you're a real inspiration on my Instagram, and I absolutely love seeing you there amongst all the kind of some bits of doom and gloom. So I love how you said, oh, I just nipped into Wales and I just took a slight detour via the New Forest, like that's on the way from Aberdeen to Somerset. So lots of lovely comments going through. You've given a lot of people food for thought and really inspired a lot of people. A lot of people commenting about how little luggage you have. And just that real involvement and the night sounds and sights that you can see, the swaying of the trees and listening to nature and being really in there and under the tree cover is wonderful. So I'm going to stop blabbering. I have got lots of questions. Um, so um, there's an obvious question about how kind of restrictive it is using a hammock, but be more interested in the benefits of focusing your mind on where you can stop and camp. And that's kind of a few kind of, talking people asking about how that changes your cycle touring.
Yeah, I mean, I did find that I required a little bit more planning while doing this in the UK compared to my trip through Germany, where I was constantly surrounded by forest. Um, and I think one thing I enjoy with cycle touring in general, not just with the hammock, is a big part of it is where am I going to sleep tonight, and that's a really nice thing that it really does sort of pare down the things you have to deal with in each day. It's really, where am I going to go? What am I going to eat, and where am I going to sleep? And the latter part of the day is usually focused on where you're going to sleep, and that is always weather dependent as well. So do I need to find shelter? Or am I going to be fine, in the hammock, in a patch of woodland? And yeah, I think in terms of focusing your mind, just reducing the number of things that you need to think about and concentrate on, it's a really quite a meditative experience.
It's really, yeah, and it's that infographic you showed was very shocking to kind of really see how tree depleted our country is, and to see that Northern Ireland is 8.4% tree cover, and that is the only stat that you showed that's kind of below 10%, and that's really frightening. So it must have been, did it take a lot longer in England than some of your previous trips? I know when I watched your talk about Sweden, for example.
Absolutely, definitely. I mean, I always found that I needed to look at the map early in the day and think, okay, well, if I head this way, there's going to be nowhere I can sleep. I'm going to be on the ground and in a soggy mess by the morning. So that's not going to be very nice. Whereas, maybe here there's a little patch of green. Is that forest? Is that woodland? So there was a lot more research, a lot more Googling going on. Some of the areas going across, for example, the North Pennines, the Yorkshire Dales, parts of the Lake Districts, definitely more tricky.
Mm.
As I said, when I was coming across the North Pennines, we stayed in campsites. There wasn't really anywhere else I could have slept with the hammock. So yeah, it definitely takes a little bit more planning.
So then talking about the trials and tribulations. So somebody has asked, falling pine cones or worse if it's windy. Which is worse, falling debris or wind for you?
Ooh, I definitely want to avoid falling debris. Never had to
Um,
deal with that though, actually.
okay, great. Um, a couple of people actually have asked, did you get a response from the council regarding those bees that you kept finding? It's kind of quite
No,
distressing.
no, I didn't. I didn't hear a thing
Nothing.
back. No, no. Yeah,
Oh
that was very
dear.
sad. I kind of wished I had knocked on the door of the chap in the death machine and had a word with him, but I didn't have the nerve to do it, so I didn't.
Oh, good on you. Um, so a couple of kind of more practical questions. Did you cover the reflective bits on your bike at night to reduce reflection from lights of people passing by?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I did always do that, unless I was so sort of deep into an area where I just thought, well, I'm not anywhere near a road. I'm not near a footpath. Nobody's coming in here. But I always just kind of like to do that. Just, I don't know if it looks weird to animals, these reflectors, if there is any sort of moonlight that catches them. So yeah, I always try and just hang my waterproof jacket over that, or anything that I have that can cover those up.
Thinking of every detail of how you can have not such a negative impact on nature. I love it. So a few quick fire questions. Have you ever hammocked without using trees?
In my room, yeah, in my flat. And one time I hung the hammock between a car and a kind of rock with a branch sticking out. Um, Other than that, no, no, I need to get more adventurous with the hammock, don't I?
Some extreme hammocking coming up. What do you eat while cycling?
Good question. So I tend to cook midday rather than the evening as much as I can, just because I might be, quite tired and not quite sure where I'm going to be at night, whether it's ideal for using a stove. So I tend to cook midday. I will stop in a shop wherever I can, and buy, a bunch of veggies and maybe a tin of beans or something. My usual go-to is a sort of a vegetable stew with either some spaghetti or some couscous and a tin of kidney beans or butter beans or something like that. As many greens as I can, some kale, whatever I can put in there, with a lot of bread, and then I'll eat a lot of nuts, dates, apricots, that kind of thing for energy during the day. Yeah, and the usual.
Yes,
Yeah.
all the good sugars. Um, we have a question of your plan B. I think you kind of slightly touched on this, but a plan B if you can't find any suitable trees or no trees at all, like in the Forest of Bowland.
Yeah, I mean, if I really couldn't, then I'd sleep on the floor, and I might have a terrible night. But I guess that is what would happen. I did do that one time on my trip through Northern Europe in the Netherlands. I had a horrid night sleeping on the floor. I didn't have the skills to do something amazing with my tarpaulin, so yeah, it wasn't the best night. If the weather's really bad, my plan B is always warm showers. I was very
Right.
lucky actually on this trip with Warm Showers hosts in Scotland. They were just amazing. I remember one time I was going down through the Loch Lomond area. It was after the very wet night I showed with the tarp there, and the weather was horrid, and it just didn't stop raining. It was torrential, and I had no idea where I was going to sleep. I couldn't see anywhere good on the map. So I sent out a couple of messages to Warm Showers hosts in the nearby area, and one responded within minutes, actually within minutes. And he said, "Come right over, there's a vegetables curry on the stove." And within about half an hour,
Ah,
I got a cup of tea in my hand, and my clothes were drying. And yeah, so something always turns up. I don't know how, but it does.
oh, the most lovely response you could receive, isn't it? That's fantastic. Really enjoyed your talk and pictures, and there's so much of this in the chat as well. So I hope you stop and read that after. Thank you. Looks like you routinely sleep without a tarp. How is the dew in the morning?
Yeah, I do sleep without a tarp whenever I can. And although I had a lot of rain on this trip, I seem to have a lot of dry nights as well. So I did go without the tarp quite a lot. Dew is is sometimes an issue, not always though. And I think with the mosquito netting, maybe that holds it off a little bit. Yeah, sometimes things are a little bit damp inside, but I've never found it to be too much of an issue. Perhaps less so than, in a cheap tent where you've got condensation inside.
Yes. Great answer. Do you have to be skilled in knots to tie hammocks securely to
No.
trees?
No, you
Have you
don't.
got, I imagine you've got quite a lot better at knots, haven't you?
I have definitely got better, but I think pretty much every time I go on a trip, I think, oh, how do I do this again? And it takes me a day or two to remind myself how to tie the knot that I use, which is a kind of figure of eight lashing. Check out the Hennessy Hammock website. They've got some really good suggestions on a really simple way to hang your hammock and the knots to use.
Fantastic. Just wondering, Gary's asking, how would a bivy bag work with a hammock other than keeping off the ground?
A bivy bag inside the hammock or
I don't
in.
know. I'm kind of wondering if Gary, if you're still here, if you could you can just pop it in the chat and just let us know exactly um your question there. Jack's asked, how far away from the road do you prefer to hang your hammock?
I mean, as far away as possible in a sense, but then I don't want to go way off track. If I'm trying to make progress along a particular road and I've got to return to that road in the morning. Um, I think the key thing for me is that if there is a lot of traffic, I try to leave the road as discreetly as possible so that, there's not loads of cars that see, where's that person going? Um, Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to be out of sight of the road. I don't want personally, I don't want, headlights all through the night, and I don't want to be lying there overthinking, oh, can they see that bit of my reflector? And so I
Mm.
try and get as far away as possible. But quite often, I realize that I overthink these things. And, if I'm setting up the hammock quite late, if it's almost dark, if I'm a bit near the road, well, so be it. It doesn't matter. It means I have a shorter trip to return to the road in the morning.
Good way of thinking about it. I like it. Tina has asked how you deal with deer during the night. Have you had any drastic
Um,
interactions?
no, I haven't had any interactions. I often hear them. But no, I haven't had deer approach me, or I've seen them plenty, but they tend to disappear as quickly as they appear, which is lovely to
And
see them.
okay. Martin's asked how much you've refined your sleeping and food as time has gone on.
In terms of reducing what I'm taking, definitely. Yeah, food is an up and down thing. Sometimes I feel like I'm carrying 100 weight of potatoes in my pannier, and I think, well, what am I doing with all this there? Um, I find now in terms of food, there's a few staples that I always carry, and one of those is a pot of miso, a jar or a pack of miso, because miso makes everything taste better. And while you are waiting for your food to cook, if you can have some hot miso soup, you just all the nutrients and it's just really warming. So there's a few things like that that I've learned that I think, yeah, I will always do that from now on.
Yeah, excellent top tip. Andrew's asking if you've ever fallen out of your hammock.
Never fallen out, but I have once hit the ground because I didn't tie it properly, which, I was only, a couple of feet off the ground, but it does give you quite a shock. So,
That's a
yeah.
good one. Gary has got back on about the bivy bag. I just meant using a basic bivy, i.e., without a frame, etc., to keep sheltered from the rain instead of a tarp. Got you.
Yeah, definitely worth a try. Yeah, I think there are so many different ways we can arrange our sleeping system, and just exploring different things, seeing what works for us is great.
Well, when you're up for your extreme hammocking, John has put a suggestion in the chat that gate posts could be good. Don't know about the gate, where the gate is if the gate post, but anyway, there you go. There's a possible idea. And then lastly, there's someone who's cycling across Europe this year and is cycling through Sweden. Any tips? Can they watch your Sweden talk anywhere?
I
Is
don't
that
think it was recorded. It was at the
okay?
CTF last year. I don't think it was recorded at all. But feel free to get in touch, and I can send you some slides or something. But tips for Sweden, yeah, just camp near as many lakes as you possibly can because it's stunning and beautiful. But being near the lakes, depending on what time of year you're going, I found it much, much colder. And so I was in Sweden in September and it was beginning to get quite cold. I'm probably better equipped for the cold now than I was then, but I have a much better thermarest. But yeah, I found when it was getting a bit cold, moving away from the lakes was a little bit better, a bit warmer.
Yeah, love it.
But a beautiful country.
And yeah. So, if you would like to follow Catherine, and I strongly recommend that you do that on Instagram, she's Catherine Can
Yeah.
on Insta.
Put
So
that
you
in
could
Instagram.
maybe find her there to ask any further questions. But if nobody has any further questions, then it just remains to say thank you so much for your time. And your talks are always really inspiring. And having seen your heard your I nipped into Wales and I've taken a bit of a detour around the New Forest. I'm actually terrified at you saying that you might invite me to cycle with you to the next cycle touring festival. I'll leave a week before you and we'll see where we end up.
Looking forward
Thank
to
you
it.
so much, Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. It's been really lovely.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. I don't know if Laura's going to chop us off now or everyone can just bid a farewell. But thank you very much indeed.